Okay, let's look at Standard 22, Substandard D. Describe the significance of Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham Jail and his I Have a Dream speech. So we're going to look at both of those and see what their significance is and describe what that significance is. So our objective here today is to focus on the letter from Birmingham Jail, describe why it is significant in U.S. history, and then the I Have a Dream speech and describe why it is significant here in our standards. So we're going by the letter of the language of the standards here. Letter of Birmingham Jail, I Have a Dream speech. The theme here is civil rights, political and social interactions with this leader, Martin Luther King Jr. So let's look at the letter from Birmingham Jail first. I'm going to make a real quick statement about this. This is the letter from Birmingham Jail. Here's Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested in Birmingham for protesting and demonstrating there. And this letter becomes this literary piece of work. It really is truly a great piece of argumentative work, and you probably need to read it a little closer. I'm going to pull some excerpts from it, but I would strongly suggest you read it in detail. It's very good letter that he wrote, and he's very intelligent, and you can see that from his writings. But he addresses some white preachers or ministers in Birmingham, and their statements were that his mass protest and these demonstrations and this televised violence indicates that he's trying to move too fast to make change, and they're asking him to wait and to be patient and not go so fast because change takes time. And they're saying that his civil disobedience and his mass protest and demonstrations are not necessary, and that the courts will handle a lot of these matters if Martin Luther King Jr. would just be patient. And they said his movement was going too fast, too quick, and causing a lot of violence with white people. And so these ministers had watched all this violence on television like the rest of the people, and we talked about the impact of that. And here's Martin Luther King Jr. being arrested in Birmingham, April 16th, 1963. He's there protesting Jim Crow, segregation, the mistreatment of African Americans, and they witness him getting arrested, witness all this violence, dogs being sicked on African Americans, the fire hoses being used to knock people down. And so 8 white ministers, and here they are here, publicly announce and denounce Martin Luther King Jr.'s demonstrations and protests as being too fast, too quick. Now these gentlemen wanted civil rights for African Americans. They did, but they disagreed with his strategies and tactics of civil disobedience, and they thought that it takes time to make change. The courts will over time, and they're arguing with Martin Luther King Jr. on the use of civil disobedience, these protest marches and demonstrations. And let's look at what the definition of civil disobedience is. The definition is the active professed refusal to obey certain laws and commands of government in a nonviolent manner and as a form of respectful disagreement. That's what civil disagreement is. We're going to look at these words in a few minutes and see how they are there. But characteristics: refusing to follow a law you think is wrong, passively resisting with non-violence, not with violence, but with non-violence. And then there's 2 examples. Mahatma Gandhi used civil disobedience in India in an independence movement against Great Britain, and it was a successful movement. And Henry David Thoreau, even before that, he used civil disobedience and even wrote a book called Of Civil Disobedience to Government, and it was later changed to Essay on Civil Disobedience. But he protested slavery in the Mexican-American War by refusing to pay his taxes, and he was put in jail as well. Some non-examples are faithfully following the law, whether the law is right or wrong. And so this is the definition of civil disobedience, and we're going to work on this a little bit more as we go. Martin Luther King Jr. was very much influenced by these 2 men here. First of all, he had read Civil Disobedience, an essay on civil disobedience that was published by Henry David Thoreau here and he's a transcendentalist writer. You'll learn that in American literature. And in 1849, he wrote this protesting slavery in the Mexican-American War. He refused to pay his taxes, and he put that protest in action. That's what he did, and he did it non-violently. And Henry David Thoreau has a great impact on Martin Luther King Jr. And then another example was Mahatma Gandhi. And he employed nonviolent civil disobedience and led a successful independence movement in India against Great Britain. And so these two men make this huge impact on Martin Luther King Jr. And he believes in the civil disobedience. And so if we look at these words, civilized or civil means respect to order in a civilized society, to behave and to act in a nonviolent way and to follow the law. That's what civilized means. We're not a barbaric nation, we're not violent, but we're civilized. We follow law and order. And then there's another word that says disobedience, to disobey the things that you think are wrong or not wrong. So it looks like these two words really do not go well together with one another. They look like the opposite. But here they're put together to show and illustrate that there is a form of disobedience that is a form of respectful disagreement of laws that we think are wrong. In a few moments you'll hear Martin Luther King Jr. say, an unjust law is no law at all. And that's what he was arguing, is a civilized disobedience or civil disobedience, the use of it. So as we read the letter from Birmingham Jail, and you need to read it, I'm going to only look at some excerpts, but ask yourself this question: did Martin Luther King Jr. defend or justify the use of civil disobedience in his letter? Did he defend the use of it against these 8 white ministers that said he should not be using it, he should not be demonstrating, he should not be marching, he should not be protesting because it's causing this violence? Did he justify the use or defend the use of civil disobedience in his letter from Birmingham Jail? And that's who he's writing this letter to, because he's writing this letter as a response, and he says he wrote it as a response to these 8 white ministers in Birmingham, Alabama, that said his use of civil disobedience or his mass protests and demonstrations were not useful, were not needed, and they caused too much trouble. And this is his letter. And so let's look at it and let's answer this question here: did Martin Luther King Jr. defend or justify the use of civil disobedience in his letter? Okay, here he is. I don't have all of his reading of this, but I have a little bit. Here's the first part.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely.
So that's where his dear clergyman, he's talking about these 8 white men that said that his work was unwise and untimely, that he needed to wait. And there he is saying that. That's part of his letter there that was written. Here's another part.
I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here.
I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. Up here he says, I don't have this recorded, it says, several months ago the affiliate here in Birmingham of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference asked us to be on call to engage in a non-violent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came we lived up to our promise. And that's another part of it. And here's a very, very famous quote. He says,
injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And he said in Birmingham there was injustice. We just heard him say that. And then here's another part where he says, that these 8 ministers are really looking at the effects of what's going on, but not really the cause. And let's listen to what he says here.
You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations.
So he's talking about the segregation, the mistreatment of African Americans. Those were the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. And up here he references them to deploring the demonstrations of violence that taken place in Birmingham, and he's addressing that in his argument here. And so we see here, let's see. Let's listen to what he has to say here.
It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative.
And he talked about in the letter about negotiation. He said they tried to negotiate, but they would not negotiate with them and end all this violence against African Americans. So he says it's unfortunate demonstrations are going on, but they had no other choice. Here's another one. Here it says, I don't have a recording on this one. Mindful of the difficulties involved, we dedicate to undertake a process of self-purification. We began a series of workshops on non-violence, and we repeatedly ask ourselves, are you able to accept blows without retaliating? Are you able to endure the ordeal of jail? That is the definition there of nonviolent protest, nonviolent peaceful protest. Even if you're hit and smacked in the face and spit on and cussed at, called bad names, can you not return and retaliate with violence? And that's what he's saying here. Nonviolent peaceful protest is what they planned on doing. He knew the news media was showing the cameras and people watching it all home. So he knew that they could not retort to violence because that would give people a cause to say their movement was a violent one. And here's another one. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Non-violent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. So here he is defending and justifying why they're marching, why they're using these civil disobedient tactics like sit-ins, marches, and so forth. He addresses those there. Those are civil disobedient strategies. A social protest or social demonstrations here to get the attention of these people, to get them to finally negotiate an end to what's going on, is what he's saying here. He's justifying the use of this. And here we go again. He says, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, non-violent tension which is necessary for growth. And here he's talking about this non-violent protest. He doesn't like violence at all, period. And he says, we must see the need for non-violent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. He said we have to use these nonviolent civil disobedience to get these people to make a change. And he is justifying here the use of civil disobedience, the marches, the protests he mentioned a few moments ago, to try to put pressure on people to change. And then he says, one of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. So some have asked, why didn't you give the new city administration time to act? And then he said, my friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and non-violent pressure. In other words, he says we haven't made any gains in civil rights unless we use civil disobedience, unless we use protest and demonstrations that were non-violent. That's what he says here. And then here he gives a frank reply to why we can't wait. He says, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well timed. and the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. In other words, those people who are not suffering are very quick to say wait, but we can't wait because African Americans are being mistreated. That's what he's saying. That it really means never, that they don't want to change, and that this peaceful protest, these demonstrations are putting pressure on them to change, or at least to accept that there is a problem. And here he says, perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging dark of segregation to say wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothered in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. So here he addresses their questions. He says, we can't wait. Why we can't wait? We're being lynched. We're being called all these horrible names. We're being treated like second-class citizens, and you want us to wait? And only those people who are not being treated that way are yelling wait, and it really equates to never. There's never going to be a change. And this is why we're protesting. This is why we're demonstrating. This is why civil disobedience is necessary. That's what he's arguing here. And then he says, one may want to ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. And here he is, he's laying it out here, that there is a moral obligation and a responsibility to disobey unjust laws like the Jim Crow laws, segregation laws. Here we have it, right here. Here's his argument, right here, in its fullest sense, and right here at its culmination. It says that an unjust law is no law at all. Civil disobedience, these demonstrations and march and protests put pressure on these people who don't want to change, and they want them to change. So we ask ourselves, did Martin Luther King Jr. defend or justify the use of civil disobedience in his letter? And I think if you really interpret what he wrote there in those excerpts from his letter from Birmingham Jail, you would have to actually say he did. And so civil disobedience, Martin Luther King Jr. justified using civil disobedience as a strategy for social change. And an example of civil disobedience, the definition is disobeying an unjust law in which the participants are protesting for social change. That's the definition there. And King argued that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws. And here, this is an example of an unjust law being broken in North Carolina, Woolworth County, Woolworth counter there in this shop here. These kids come in and sit down at this counter, whites and blacks, to be served sitting together, and in segregation that wasn't allowed as a law for whites and blacks to sit together. And they protested this with civil disobedience. Just go in here and sit down, nothing violent, non-violent, using civil disobedience. They broke this unjust law, and here's some people back here, some racist pouring ice cream and soft drinks on their head, spitting on them, telling them to leave until they're arrested. And that's an example of civil disobedience, and that's what he's pointing out, and that's what he is justifying and defending in his letter from Birmingham Jail. And I hope this helps you. And let's move on to I Have a Dream speech. His I Have a Dream speech. We've talked about this before, that right after the University of Alabama, right after Governor George Wallace refused to move out of the way and let those two African American students enter the university, and John F. Kennedy made a speech saying that in a few months he would be asking Congress to pass civil rights legislation, that Martin Luther King Jr. in August 28th, like a month or two later, after John F. Kennedy made his speech, Martin Luther King Jr. marches into Washington, D.C. with A. Philip Randolph. And A. Philip Randolph threatened one back during 1941, during World War II. And FDR appeased him by issuing executive orders. And now A. Philip Randolph marches with Martin Luther King Jr. to Washington, D.C. And there, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech in front of the Lincoln Monument. And this video I'm about to show you of the speech is a short segment, shows the Lincoln Monument, if you can see it in the beginning of it. And then in August 28, 1963, in front of 200 to 250,000 civil rights activists out here, he demanded equality for all citizens. Part of his speech reads like this. Let's see. He says, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And he says, I have a dream today that one day little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. And he's talking about this in Alabama. And let's watch a short clip of this and we'll finish this up.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Lincoln Memorial there.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Okay. So have we met our objective? Let's go up here and see if we met this objective. I think we have. It says, describe the significance of the Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham Jail and his "I Have a Dream" speech. And sorry for the little error there in clicking on that video, but okay, here we have achieved this, and I hope if you have any questions you'll ask them in class. Good luck on the quiz, the test, and the EOCT.